D.B. Cooper, the gentleman bandit who vanished into legend on a rain-soaked Thanksgiving Eve in 1971. A man carrying nothing more than a briefcase and an audacious plan that would transform him into America's most enigmatic folk hero. What happened over the next few hours would baffle the FBI for decades, spawn countless theories, and create the only unsolved case of air piracy in American history. His name, or at least the name he gave, was Dan Cooper. But thanks to a media mishap that stuck, history would remember him as D.B. Cooper, the polite hijacker who held an airplane hostage collected at $200,000 ransom, and then did the unthinkable. He jumped out of the Boeing 727 somewhere over the dark wilderness of the Pacific Northwest and simply vanished. The perfect crime begins with perfect manners. Picture this: Thanksgiving 1971. Richard Nixon is president. The Vietnam War rages on, and Americans are growing increasingly cynical about authority. Into this moment steps a man who appears utterly unremarkable. Middle-aged, perhaps in his mid-40s, wearing a dark business suit, white shirt and narrow black tie. He orders a bourbon and soda, neat, civilized. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner barely notices him as he settles into seat 18C on the short afternoon flight from Portland to Seattle. Then he hands her a note. Initially, Schaffner assumes it's the phone number of yet another flirtatious passenger and tucks it into her pocket without reading it. But Cooper leans close and speaks words that would echo through history. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." This is where the story hooks you, because unlike the violent skyjackers who had plagued airlines in the late 1960s and early 1970s, D.B. Cooper was unfailingly polite. When Schaffner read the note, claiming he had a bomb and demanding money, Cooper showed her the briefcase. Inside, she glimpsed red cylinders, wires, and a battery. He wasn't aggressive or threatening. He was calm, almost apologetic. He even offered to show his bomb to the pilot if it would make things easier. The negotiation, a hijacker who said please and thank you. Here's where Cooper's meticulous planning becomes evident. His demands were specific: 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills. Not hundreds, which would be easier to trace in large transactions, but 20s, the everyday currency of 1971 America. The parachutes? He wanted 4, knowing that authorities would unsabotage any if they believed he might force a crew member to jump with him. While the plane circled Seattle for nearly 2 hours, the FBI scrambled to meet his demands. Cooper allowed the other passengers to believe they were experiencing mere mechanical difficulties. He chatted with Schaffner, ordered another bourbon, and even paid for his drinks, tipping generously. Witnesses would later describe him as calm, never raising his voice, treating the crew with respect that bordered on old-fashioned courtesy. At Seattle-Tacoma Airport, the airline delivered the ransom and parachutes. Cooper released all 36 passengers and 2 of the 3 flight attendants, keeping only pilot William Scott, co-pilot William Ratachak, flight engineer H.E. Anderson, and flight attendant Tina Mucklow. His instructions were precise: fly to Mexico City at minimum speed with the landing gear down, wing flaps at 15 degrees, and the rear air stair deployed. The cabin was to remain unpressurized and stay below 10,000 feet. The crew tried to explain that this configuration would require a refueling stop in Reno. Cooper agreed immediately. Everything about his behavior suggested someone who had studied aviation extensively, someone who understood exactly what a 727 could and couldn't do. The leap into immortality at 8 p.m., Flight 305 took off into the darkness, heading south through a storm. Cooper sent flight attendant Mucklow to the cockpit and told her to close the curtain behind her. Alone in the cabin with $200,000 and 4 parachutes, Cooper prepared for what would become the most mythologized moment in criminal history. Somewhere around 8:13 p.m., the crew felt a pressure bump and saw an indicator light suggesting the aft air stair had been deployed. They were flying somewhere over southwest Washington, near the Lewis River, in complete darkness, through a rainstorm, at 10,000 feet above dense wilderness. The temperature outside was 7 degrees below zero, the wind chill, lethal, and D.B. Cooper jumped. When the plane landed in Reno, he was gone. Left behind, 2 parachutes, Cooper's clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, 8 cigarette butts. Cooper had chain-smoked Raleigh filters throughout the ordeal, and 66 fingerprints that matched no one in any database. The investigation that consumed the FBI's investigation, codenamed Northwest hijacking, became one of the most extensive and expensive in Bureau history. They interviewed hundreds of suspects, analyzed thousands of tips, and pursued leads across the country. The working theory? Cooper almost certainly died in the jump. Consider the circumstances. He jumped at night, in a storm, over a mountainous forest, wearing only a business suit and loafers. He carried a 21-pound money bag. He chose a military-style parachute that required expert knowledge to deploy, and he left behind the superior civilian parachute that would have been easier to use. He jumped into temperatures that could cause hypothermia within minutes. Yet here's the maddening paradox that keeps this case alive. They never found his body. In 1980, a young boy discovered $5,800 of the ransom money along the Columbia River, about 20 miles downstream from Cooper's suspected drop zone. The bills were badly deteriorated, arranged in packets as the FBI had bundled them. But how did they get there? If Cooper died in the wilderness, why would his money wash up in the river? From criminal to folk hero, the birth of a legend in the cynical aftermath of Watergate, Vietnam, and widespread institutional distrust, D.B. Cooper became something unexpected, a folk hero. He was the little guy who outsmarted the system. He hurt no one. He was polite, even charming. In an era of violent crime, Cooper seemed almost gentlemanly by comparison. The Pacific Northwest embraced him enthusiastically. Bars began serving D.B. Cooper cocktails. Songs were written. T-shirts appeared. Annual commemorations sprung up. He became a Robin Hood figure for the jet age, though notably, he kept the money for himself. The cultural fascination reveals something profound about American mythology. We've always loved outlaws who break the rules with style. Jesse James, Bonnie and Clyde, Butch Cassidy. Cooper fit perfectly into this tradition. He challenged authority without violence, disappeared without a trace, and left behind more questions than answers. The suspects who almost were over the decades, numerous suspects emerged. Richard Floyd McCoy hijacked a plane 5 months later using a nearly identical method and was caught. Some investigators believed McCoy was Cooper, but the physical descriptions didn't match. Kenneth Christensen, a Northwest Orient purser and former paratrooper, fit the profile eerily well, but died before investigators could question him thoroughly. Barbara Dayton, a trans woman who claimed to be Cooper, had the skydiving expertise but couldn't substantiate her claims. In 2011, a woman came forward claiming her late uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper, an intriguing name similarity, was the hijacker. The FBI investigated, found circumstantial evidence, but never definitively confirmed. Each suspect brought tantalizing possibilities but no conclusive proof. The FBI officially suspended active investigation in 2016, though they promised to analyze any physical evidence that emerged. Why we can't let go 50 years later? D.B. Cooper endures in our collective imagination because he represents the perfect unsolved mystery. He's Amelia Earhart with a parachute, Jimmy Hoffa with a business suit. The question isn't just who he was, but whether he survived. Did he die in that frozen forest, his bones scattered by animals, the remaining cash decomposed into mulch? Or did he somehow survive, living quietly among us? Perhaps chuckling at the annual commemorations, the documentaries, the endless speculation? The historian in me knows the most likely scenario. Cooper died on impact or shortly after, another victim of hubris and poor planning. But the human in me, and perhaps the human in all of us, wants to believe in the impossible. We want to believe that somewhere, an old man with a secret past occasionally opens a safe deposit box and smiles at the musty $20 bills inside. D.B. Cooper gave us something increasingly rare in our modern age of surveillance and data, a genuine mystery. In a world where everything is tracked, recorded, and analyzed, he simply disappeared. And in doing so, he became immortal. The case remains open. The legend continues to grow. And somewhere over the Pacific Northwest on stormy November nights, people still look up at the sky and wonder, did he make it?